Hello, welcome to Freedom in the Teachings of St. Josemaria. My name is Ailish McEwen. This is a series of recordings of classes we had back in March. So they're perhaps a little bit rough in places because they're an interactive class. I'm re-recording the first class of this series so that I can tell you what's available for you online, and also because I forgot to press the record button the first time I gave this course. So this is a series, I said a series of videos. On the website, you should find the slides that I'm using to go through if you'd like to print them out or have them more readily available for you. You'll also find some course notes, which are the ones I'm working from in the class. They follow the order of the classes. And also I have put up a list of links to optional readings and also some little videos. So rather than show the video clips in the Zoom classes, I've put them up there. So for instance, today there is a small video, two small videos from YouTube. One is called What is Freedom? And the other one is called What does freedom mean to you? And then readings, it's chapter 1 of the course outline. And then there's an article from The Atlantic called There's More to Life Than Being Happy. There's a link to that on the website. And also an article from the Opus Dei website, there's a link to this, and it's called Authors of Our Own Lives. So they're optional, but if you have time to look at them, you might find those helpful. The key readings for this course are 2 homilies from St. Josemaria. So one in Friends of God on freedom, and the second one is in Christ is Passing By, which is Christian respect for persons and their freedom. Okay, so if we begin here, first of all as well, I think you might want to have a think about what you can get out of this subject if you're doing it on your own. Perhaps think, well, first of all, pray to the Holy Spirit that you get what you need to receive. But also if you want to have a think about some issues or questions you might have about freedom, things that are in your mind, whether they relate to your personal life, your interior life, your life as a parent, or, in family, or with your friends, how you explain things to people. But perhaps if you have a couple of those questions, it might be helpful to have those in mind as you go through the course to see if you can find answers to those as you go, so that you can actually apply it and make it useful for you. So what we're doing, the program is at the beginning of the course notes. What I'm going to look at today is the first section on what is freedom. And essentially it's focusing around the idea of freedom, happiness, and purpose. So the relationship between those 3. In the next classes, then we move on to the more theological aspects of freedom. So looking at freedom specifically as understood by St. Josemaria. So freedom as the basis for living as a child of God. So in that we'll look at how St. Josemaria understood freedom. We'll look at freedom and obedience, grace and freedom divine filiation. And then in the third section, look at how you put together, I suppose, or integrate the reason, the will, and the feelings, the emotions in the way that we exercise and live out our freedom. And then the last section is on really how we foster conditions or an environment that allows people to grow in freedom. What do we require? And that's something that I suppose it's always relevant, but perhaps particularly relevant now when we're looking at questions of religious freedom coming up in legislation, at least in Australia. Okay, so this is a quote by St. Augustine, who says, "God created us without us, but he did not will to save us without us." And that, I think, it gets to the heart of this mystery of freedom. Why did God make us free? That he loves us. There's this mystery of freedom. I think we'll find as we go through how much this mystery of freedom relates to love. That God made us free. We say, well, why on earth would he do that? Why would you make someone free that can disobey you if you could just have everything perfect? But only a free being can love. And it's the mystery that God wanted to love us and that God wanted our love in return. He wanted creatures that could know him and love him, enter into a relationship, enter into communion with him. And so he leaves us free to do that. So St. Augustine says that we have to take a step ourselves to approach God. It's always God who loves us first. It's God who takes the initiative, God who comes to meet us. But then we are free to respond to that. So it's how we use our freedom. This depends on how we use our freedom. This idea of saving us. The question, what is freedom? So in the first class, we actually watched the little video on freedom, and we talked about it. It's a little vox pop thing where people talk about what they think freedom is, and we sort of analysed a little bit some of the main, I suppose, the main ideas that came up and a bit of a critique of those. So some of the things that came up with the idea of being able to do what you want, to go where you want, to satisfy your desires, to marry whoever you want, or whatever gender. So there's a whole lot of different ways of approaching freedom, but a lot of it perhaps centered around desire satisfaction. Are you free, truly free, when you're able to satisfy your desires, or about a lack of restriction? So when you're doing what you want, you're free. When you're doing something you don't feel like, you're not free. It's very much a way we can tend to see freedom. So you're free on Saturday and Sunday, and you're not free Monday to Friday when you're at work. So that perhaps is at first blush the way that we approach freedom. So I wanted to sort of look into that a little bit more deeply and say, well, what is freedom really? So the Catechism of the Catholic Church has a section on freedom. I've just put one question up here. It's worth having a look at if you're not familiar with the Catechism or the Compendium. That part 3 of the Catechism is the section on morals, morality, the 10 Commandments. And you might think, okay, that the Catechism will begin going, okay, here's the 10 Commandments, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. And that's not how it's done. It's framed, first of all, this whole section of morality is framed around our human dignity, in the idea that we are made in the image and likeness of God, and that we have a vocation to beatitude, meaning that we have this natural desire for happiness. And that, in a way, is something put in us by God, because we are destined to this vocation. God has made us for happiness. And so freedom occurs within this context as well, that to this being able to seek our happiness, seek this union with God. And then the idea of the catechism of the 10 Commandments really comes in this idea of learning how to be happy, if you like, the art of happiness. Are there ways to live that fit with human nature in such a way that they are more or less likely to help us attain happiness? It's a very beautiful framework, and it also mirrors the approach of St. Thomas Aquinas, the Summa. But here in this point of the Catechism, what is freedom? It says freedom is the power to act or to not act, or not to act, and so to perform deliberate acts of one's own. Freedom attains perfection in its acts when directed toward God, the sovereign good. So it sounds pretty straightforward. So that, the power to act or not act and perform deliberate acts of our own. So that in terms of saying, it doesn't mean we're not influenced by things or anything like that, but that we have a sense of being the agent, the one who makes that thing happen. At least we consent, that it comes from us. Freedom, the idea of freedom having a perfection, is something that's surprising to a lot of people. I think you're either free or you're not free. But as we'll look at in one of the later classes, we can talk about freedom as a state, and you can grow in freedom. You can learn to be more free. And so the Catechism says freedom attains perfection in its acts when it's directed toward God, the sovereign good. So we can say that freedom is not a goal. Okay, so freedom is not an end in itself. If we said in the last point that it's directed, the acts are directed towards God or directed towards the good, wanting to attain the good is what freedom is about. So freedom is not an end in itself. Sometimes we sort of can look at it, have this passion that I want to be free and desperate to be free or autonomous and nobody's going to tell me what to do, but just for its own sake. And that doesn't really make sense. There's no point being free in order to be free. We are free for something. If you want to be free, it's so that then you can direct your actions towards an end. And I think you can think about this in terms of subjectivity now, when people kind of say, well, nothing is good or bad or right or wrong, as long as you're choosing to do it, then that's good and that's free. It's free, yes, but is it good? Or are you just randomly, firing off arrows going in any particular direction with no destination in mind? So Aristotle, in his Ethics, he begins talking about ethics and he looks at it as a science of happiness as well, So he kind of says, well, is there something that all human beings want for its own sake and not for the sake of something else? And he works through a few things and he comes to the same conclusion as Augustine, that it's happiness, that all human beings want happiness. That yes, we might want money. They say, why do you want money? So I can buy things. Why do you want to buy things? In the end, it always goes back to because we think that will make us happy, that we seek happiness. And so Aristotle says, well, if that's our goal, if our goal is happiness, it makes sense to work out where that is and then direct ourselves to it, to stop and actually have a rational reflection on what are the things that make human beings happy. So he says, if you're an archer, you've got your bow and arrow and you go out, so you can just start randomly firing off your arrows. You can do that, fine, but they're just going to land all over the place. It's a waste of time, effectively. Because if you really want to, be a good archer, what do? You look for where the target is, and then you aim for the target. And that is what life is like. You work out where does happiness lie, and then you can direct yourself towards it. You have a goal that you're heading towards. So it's not an end in itself. Okay. So we say that happiness, St. Augustine, we all want to live happily. Okay. In the whole human race, there's no one who does not assent to this proposition. That you think even when someone, harms themselves, sometimes it's things saying, well, it has to be less bad. Is it a way of making the pain stop? Even suicide, it's got to be less bad. So we're always seeking happiness. So when we talk about this happiness that Aristotle talks about, if this is the goal that we're seeking, so what is it? And if we talk about happiness today, I think we can talk about contemporary ideas of happiness and then what Aristotle's talking about, which is perhaps a little bit different. So I think if you just went out on the street today and you asked someone what happiness was, I think they would tell you that it's an emotion or a feeling. You feel happy. So it's transient, it comes and goes because it's an emotional state. And emotional states don't last. It's a feeling, it's being completely alive, it's having your preferences satisfied or your desires satisfied, getting what you want, something completely subjective, that relates to personal taste. That's perhaps our idea of happiness as a contemporary notion. Aristotle, when he talks about happiness as being the thing we all want, he has a kind of a deeper, perhaps more concrete meaning. Okay? So what he's doing with this classical notion of happiness is he's looking at human nature and he's saying, are there some things that all human beings want, or that sort of work for all human beings? And when I teach at uni, you look at this topic and people say, no, it's all completely relative. It's all about personal taste. But then you put people in individual groups and you sort of say to them, okay, put together a list, work through a list. What do you think are the essential things for a happy life? What do you think that you really think are important? A meaningful life, a happy life. And surprisingly, they usually come back with the same things. They do come back with the same things because obviously we are corporeal spiritual beings. So we have bodies. So you need a minimum of shelter, safety, food, good health. You need a minimum of those things, Yes, you can still be happy without it, but this is, what would you include in a happiness package? You'd want to put in a bit of that. You'd want to put in relationships because we're social beings. You would want to put in some intellectual life and education, knowledge of some sort. You'd want to put in some sort of creativity or work or expression. There's different things that people keep coming back with. And this is what Aristotle's basically looking at. So when he says happiness, he's not just talking about feelings and preferences. He's talking about human flourishing, essentially. So like flourishing, like a life well lived. And so he says for him that's, it's not only what happens to you, it's what you do, so the acts that you are excellent in your acts, you're good at what you do and all those things. And also the sort of person that you become. So if you've read Harry Potter, that Dumbledore tells Harry, he says, it's our choices that make us who we are. It's our choices. It's what we choose to do that's important in configuring us. It has an effect on us. If you habitually steal things, you are a thief. So our actions play a role in that. So it's also that this flourishing includes the sort of person we become. So this human flourishing. So it's not just a state of mind, okay? It's about this activity of life, getting it right. It's not subjective. There's room for preference and taste, but there's objective things that relate to our human nature, those needs of a human being met. And it relates to life as a whole, not just about how I feel this morning. You know? So because feelings come and feelings go, and it depends what happens to us so much. You know? So for him, it's a much more solid, I suppose, concept that we're aiming for, you know, and that we're reflecting on in order then to think how we use our freedom. So it's interesting we talk about this idea of happiness because there is an obsession with happiness in terms of the feeling. I don't know if you've read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. It's a book that was out of print for quite a long time, but it's actually quite popular at the moment. And it's well worth reading. It's written by, Viktor Frankl, he was a psychiatrist, and he was in a concentration camp during the Second World War. He was Jewish. And I suppose he reflected a lot. He had an opportunity to reflect a lot on what he saw and what he experienced. And that was something that really helped him then in his reflections later on in his clinical practice. And in this book, he writes a lot about this idea of happiness, this idea of happiness. And he says, again and again, one is commanded and ordered to be happy. He says, happiness cannot be pursued, it must ensue. Okay? One must have a reason to be happy. Once the reason is found, however, one becomes happy automatically. And I think it's really deep because if you're just, you know, if being happy like is a feeling, you know, you're always going to be unhappy because you're stopping and you're going, am I feeling happy? Am I feeling happy? You know, you always need something more to make you feel happy. You know, it's an end in itself. He says, you know, that this pursuit of happiness in a way is a paradox because as long as you're pursuing it, you're unhappy. You know? And you think even consumerism is very much built on that. Consumerism is all about fostering discontent or dissatisfaction. You know, that what you've got is not good enough, but if you get this other thing or this newer thing or this shinier thing, life will be better. You'll be happier, you know, and you feel happy when you get it. And then, you know, 2 weeks later, they bring out a new model and yours is obsolete and you're not happy anymore, you know, so it's how it works, you know, this pursuit, if you like, of happiness or pursuit of feeling good. This is something as well that is in, I've put a reference in the notes to a book by Ross Harris called The Happiness Trap. And he talks about this as well, this idea precisely of happiness being a trap, that if we pursue it, it actually makes us very discontented. You know, we're not happy. And I think it comes back to saying then it must ensue. And this is what Aristotle is reaching for, you know, and he says, well, look, you've got to work out what are the things that make human beings happy. What is a flourishing life? What is a worthwhile life? You know, what is it that has meaning? And you do those things, and then happiness is the result of that. So it's not just, you know, chasing a feeling. You need a reason to be happy. And you're happy because you're doing something that is really worthwhile, that you are flourishing. So he extends this a little bit to talk about the essential need for purpose that we have as human beings, you know, and that's something that I suppose people can have their 3 a.m. morning moments, you know, when they wake up and think, what is the meaning of my life? Why am I here? You know, do I have a purpose? And it's very important to have a purpose. It's really important for the idea of our freedom, that for freedom, you know, freedom needs meaning. It needs to be directed into something. So Viktor Frankl, this is a picture of Viktor Frankl with his second wife. His first wife died in the Holocaust. He says, man is characterized by his search for meaning rather than his search for himself. The more he forgets himself, giving himself to a cause or another person, the more human he is. And the more he's immersed and absorbed in something or someone other than himself, the more he really becomes himself. We need a meaning outside ourselves. If the whole meaning of my life is about feeling happy, you know, you're directing it straight back inwards, you know, and that fosters us that emptiness, that discontent. When we have meaning, when you have a meaning for something, you know, you are happy to do it in a way. You know, you might not always feel happy, you know, if you're like, I feel like getting up and cleaning up that vomit, you probably don't. But, you know, it has a meaning, and that puts all the difference, you know, in taking care of someone you love is very different, you know, to, I don't know, just finding a random vomit, you know. Sorry to be gross, but I think parenthood has a lot of those sorts of things, you know, that those things, even the most revolting things, you know, can acquire a lot of meaning, you know, and we don't actually have even the same aversion perhaps when we love. So he says, being human always points and is directed to something or someone other than oneself. You know? Our freedom has to be directed outwards. Okay? So it's, whether it's a meaning to fulfill or another human being to encounter. So he sort of said in the concentration camp, You know, the people that kept going, so perhaps they had a reason to beyond themselves. You know, so perhaps they might have family members who were alive and they wanted to keep going in case they were there. Someone who had a book they wanted to publish, you know, and kept going for that reason. It had something outside themselves. The more one forgets himself by giving himself to a cause to serve or another person to love, the more human he is and the more he actualizes himself. And this, I think, is really interesting because our attitude, perhaps in Western society, to service is one where we think of that as a restriction of freedom. You know, that somehow we are less free or less valuable or something, you know, when we are serving somebody else. And Viktor Frankl's sort of pointing out, well, no, you know, when you have a meaning for that actually, it actualizes you, it makes you more human. You know, you channel your freedom into something that you really think is worthwhile. You know? I think we would need to really reevaluate the way we look at service as human beings in terms of meaning, you know, because in a culture where life is all about ourselves, we don't like the idea of service. You know? But when you see a meaning is outside yourself, you see things that are bigger than yourself, you know, that is a beautiful thing, to serve and direct yourself towards them. So he says, what is called self-actualization is not an attainable aim at all, for the simple reason that the more one would strive for it, the more he would miss it. In other words, self-actualization is possible only as a side effect of self-transcendence. We need to go beyond, outside ourselves, to actually fulfill ourselves, you know, and that even fits with what Pope John Paul II talks about when he talks about the gift, you know, the nuptial meaning of the body, for instance. He says that we are made to give ourselves to others, you know, and when we don't do that, we don't really actualize ourselves, do we? We don't have that self-giving. So I think I talked about this quite already. Okay, he also talks, he says, life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. And I think it's really true. Things that perhaps are unbearable in one situation, we'll do quite happily, you know, when we've got a meaning to do it. You know? So, I don't know, going without food, because it's really, really hard. Oh, I'm so hungry. But then when you've actually got a purpose for it, you know, you're motivated, that you can see, you know, you've got to fit into a dress or something, it's not unbearable anymore. In fact, you're choosing to do it, you know, you have a real drive. He says, ever more people today have the means to live, but no meaning to live for. I think it's really, really true as well, you know, in an affluent society. And he connects that with this idea of what he calls Sunday neurosis. He says it's like a depression that you get at the end of the weekend. You work all week to get to the weekend, and then you get to Sunday and you realise the weekend's over and all there is to do is go back to work and then work for the sake of the next weekend coming up. You know? And so you see this void in your life. You know? So again, he's always talking about this idea of meaning and these things that lie outside oneself, meaning and love. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says, God willed that man should be left in the hand of his own counsel, so that he might of his own accord seek his Creator and freely attain his full and blessed perfection by cleaving to him. And this is based on scripture, but I think that precisely, you know, that we are left in the hands of our own counsel, that we're not like other animals that just operate on instinct and flourish if they follow instinct. You know, that your goldfish that does whatever goldfish does, you know, will work well as a goldfish. You know, human beings, we don't. You know, we need to be educated. We need to acquire habits. You know, we need to have prudence. We need to learn moderation. You know, there's all these things we need to do to learn how to live and make choices about how we're going to live. You know, that we don't flourish by accident. You know, so the same way, like God makes us, and he gives us a vocation to happiness and to love. And it's like he puts a little homing beacon in us, you know, that desire we have for happiness. It's like this little homing beacon that's trying to get back to God, directing us back to God, even if we don't know that that's what we're looking for. But, you know, as free beings, we need to use our intellect and our will to do that. So to seek the Creator, we need to look for God, you know, and then freely cleave to him. So to look for him, to want him. You know, and that involves the whole person. You know, the father, and say one of the things in the bibliography, the father wrote a letter on freedom, I think in 2018, and then more recently his letter on friendship. And it's probably good to go back over those as well. You know, to think about this, that what is the purpose of our freedom? You know, that it's part of our human dignity even, you know, that idea of being made in the image and likeness of God, of being made for God. This is like where they call capax, say we're capable of God. We have a capacity for God. That and when we think about even what's part of human flourishing, there's a writer who writes in the area of natural law, and when he talks about basic goods, you know, that human beings need to flourish, you know, he includes, education and, you know, food and all that sort of stuff. But one thing he puts in is religion or religious experience. And, you know, if I put that to my students, they're like, no, you know, I'm an atheist and I'm perfectly happy and all that sort of stuff. And what he kind of says is, no, like, it doesn't mean going to a particular religious organization or a church or something like that. So, you know, the idea is that human beings are religious beings, meaning they do seek meaning outside themselves. They seek transcendence. You know, they ask themselves big questions. They do ask the big questions. And he says, you know, so it's that capacity. And if you're not asking yourself the big questions, a human being that never asks, what is the meaning of life? Why am I suffering? You know, is there anything after death? You know, you're missing a whole plane of what it means to live as a human being. You know, that capacity to put ourselves in front of the transcendent. And when we do that, that is part of that beginning of our search for God, if you like. And ultimately, that is our purpose, is to attain God, to reach God. You know, when we don't know that, you know, we don't know that we're a child of God, for instance, we don't know the deepest truths about ourselves. You know, we don't know what we are made for. Okay, so I've got here a bit on relativism and subjectivism. And I put this here again because I think people think about freedom as being part of a relativistic sort of mindset, of meaning that there is no such thing as right or wrong. You know, if you want to do it, then it's right for you. That idea, you know. So I think in the past, until recently, people have been very, very subjective. You know, everything very relativist and that. Recently, I've seen a big change. People are starting to become quite bolshy, you know, in terms of saying black and white. This is wrong. Everybody must agree. This is wrong. You know. So they're much quicker to call things out as being right or wrong, which in the past I think people were a lot more hesitant to do. But I think it's important to look at because we do have a whole generation who have been raised in a relativistic environment. You know? So we say, what is it? What does this mean? So, well, essentially relativism and subjectivism are ethical theories that say there is no objective moral right or wrong. So subjectivists say that ethical beliefs are a matter of opinion. You know, abortion's right, abortion's wrong. You can be right. I mean, it's right for you, it's wrong for me. They're equally valid. You know? So nobody's beliefs are more or less valuable than anybody else's beliefs. So they can be contradictory, but have equal value. Cultural relativism says ethical beliefs are cultural beliefs. So if your culture says it's right, then it's right for you. If a different culture says it's wrong, then it's wrong for them. And those things are equally valid. Okay, so no culture's beliefs or practices are better or worse than anyone else's. Now, one of the problems with this theory is that if you hold this theory, there's no point talking about right or wrong because it really doesn't matter, you know. In fact, there's no common ground. There's no, if what makes something right or wrong is what you feel about it, you can't have a discussion about whether something's right or wrong. You know, there's no ultimate facts. There's nothing to ground it on. And so basically we have a generation that have grown up not knowing how to discuss these subjects, okay? And also what it sort of had this idea is saying, well, all beliefs are, they sort of think all people are equal, therefore all beliefs are equal. All people have equal value, therefore all people's beliefs have equal value, which is not good reasoning, okay? But what happens now is if you criticize someone's belief, they take it that you are criticizing them. Okay, so if you don't agree with someone's belief, then they say you are not respecting them as a person. Okay, so people can take, especially young people, can take contradiction or disagreement very personally. So I think it's helpful to learn how to talk about exchanging ideas as a sign of respect. You know, so sometimes we can be afraid to say what we think about something, because we think, well, if I say what I think, then I'm imposing my view on them. You know, if I'm a Christian or whatever, and then I'm imposing my view. And the fact is I think when you say, well, no, it's not. You know, it's okay. You can share views without being afraid of being seen as intolerant or imposing your views. You know, because you say, well, actually, to share my opinion with you is a gift, okay? If I didn't respect you, I wouldn't waste my time. I really wouldn't waste my time. Or if I thought I could convince you that easily, it really wouldn't be worth it, you know? Precisely, I bother and I take the time to tell you what I think about something because I respect the fact that you have the capacity to hear what I say, to take it away, to think about it, and to come to your own conclusions, okay? As I respect your capacity to do that. So I don't explain myself to my dog because there's really no point. I explain myself to you because there is a point, you know? And what I hope you can do is you come to your own conclusion after thinking, then you come back and you share your view with me. I can hear what you say. Okay, I can take those things. Maybe there's something I haven't taken into account. You have a perspective, you have a different piece of knowledge or whatever. You sharing that with me allows me to reflect on my view, to go away and think about it and come back. We have a conversation and we both learn. You know? And it's actually a tremendously respectful process. Okay, it's not dogmatic. It's not assuming I'm right. Okay, it's opening a dialogue where we can exchange and we can both learn. And for some of us, that might seem like totally obvious. For other people, this is not obvious at all. Okay? They feel that if you share a view, you are imposing or you are being intolerant. You know, so I think, yeah, just to show that openness, and perhaps to do that. And it's funny doing that when I'm sitting here actually just talking nonstop to a screen. But I think one of the things is they have to see that we listen, because that proves that we respect them and that we really want to know what they think. You know? Because sometimes we're having a conversation and somebody's telling us what they think and we're just waiting for them to draw a breath to tell them what we think, you know, tell them why they're wrong, you know. But to actually listen and ask questions, to really listen, you know, and really see what we can learn from others. And I think that's something that we need to teach again, you know, because that's lost. So people lose that fear of hearing things they don't agree with, or saying things they might not have others agree with. So anyway, from that spiel. So this idea of relativism and subjectivism is a problem for freedom, okay? Because it says there is nothing to base your freedom on. There's nothing, no reason to direct it in any particular way. So when Aristotle says you need to have the target and direct the arrow towards the target, subjectivism and relativism say there is no target and there's no one thing more worth hitting than anything else. You know, for a radical subjectivist, they might say there's no way of even knowing the target's there. How can I know the target's there? So it's very hard to have a conversation on that basis. But can we say, well, are all opinions of equal value? And I think we can say, and you know, we can say, well, all people are of equal value, yes. And again, I think sometimes we have to be careful to actually assert that, make that clear, because otherwise people just assume they can perhaps assume that we don't think that. So sometimes you've got to, you know, state the obvious and lay down our areas of common agreement. Yes, people have equal rights to hold opinions. Okay, people are equal and people have equal rights to hold opinions. Okay, but there are reasons why one opinion might not have the same value as another opinion. So, for instance, facts. You know, someone might know something about the topic. You know, they might work in a particular area, and someone else might know nothing about a topic. You know, and we often hold opinions, and sometimes even quite strong opinions, on things we know very little about. And we're entitled to do it, right? We're entitled to have opinions. An opinion shows that you're thinking. Mm-hmm. But we need to know, well, how strong is my opinion? How well founded is my opinion? You know? So an opinion might not be of equal value if it's coming from someone who knows nothing about a topic. An opinion might be based on bias or prejudice. And that's something, again, that needs to be taken into account. Okay? There might be underlying assumptions that are wrong. So sometimes in an argument, you know, it all sounds extremely logical, mm-hmm. but the assumptions are the unstated things that underlie it. You know, so you could have an unstated assumption, for instance, that that's racist, okay, or that says God doesn't exist, or whatever it is. You could have these unstated assumptions, and so what's built on top, while it looks logical, is also going to be faulty. You know? So we need to be aware of what those underlying assumptions are. Faulty reasoning. So for a good deductive argument, logical argument, we can say, your premises, your facts, your starting points have to be true. So if you're using something that's not true, your conclusion is not going to be very reliable. Okay, so your starting point has to be true. So you have to have done your research, that sort of stuff. And then your conclusion has to follow from the premises. Okay, so if you're making logical jumps, your conclusion, your opinion, is again not going to be well founded. So it has to follow from your premises. You can't just draw a random conclusion that doesn't follow. And then can say that the conclusion must be the only one that you can draw for a good deductive argument. So, for example, there's a movie, An Affair to Remember. It's a mushy movie. I think it's black and white, if I remember. About this couple that they meet on a cruise, the transatlantic crossing, and they fall desperately in love. And so then they say, well, this has all been so hurried, so let's go back to our own places, and we'll take a year to get our lives organised, that sort of thing. And if we still love each other, let's meet in 12 months' time at the top of the Empire State Building. Sleepless in Seattle is based on this. And so they agree they'll do that, and the year goes by. And then the morning comes, and the guy's there bright and early, with the flowers, the ring, the chocolates, and he's up there at the top of the Empire State Building waiting for the girl. Time passes, she doesn't come, lunchtime passes, the afternoon passes, dinner time passes. Finally, it's just the cleaners mopping the floor, and she hasn't come. And so you think, well, what conclusion could he draw? So, well, we said we'd meet on this day, true. We said don't come if you don't want to, if you don't want to go ahead, true. Conclusion, well, she hasn't come, true. Conclusion, she's changed her mind. Okay. You go, all right, yep, that's a pretty good logical argument. But is that the only conclusion you could draw? He draws that conclusion and he goes off and he's angry and bitter and twisted and hurt and all that sort of stuff, and it takes the rest of the movie to sort that out. So spoiler, so block your ears if you don't want to hear this, but basically what happens is she's on her way there, she's looking up at the building and she jumps out of the taxi, she's looking up to see her beloved, and she gets hit by a car. Okay, gets taken off in an ambulance, becomes paraplegic, doesn't want to be a burden on him, so she never tells him, So essentially, yes, it's looked very logical what he said, and his opinion then that she's a terrible person and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, it all looks logical, but it wasn't the only conclusion that he could draw. Something could have happened to her, and he didn't stop to ask himself that question. So there's these basic things of reasoning that can sometimes be, well, no, your opinion is not as well founded. It's not as valid as somebody else's. Okay, so, or the things you haven't taken into account at all. And they're things we can learn about ourselves as well by listening to others. So there's some more on that in the notes. I'm going to stop now, and I think the next video picks up with the next topic, which is natural law. And I didn't pray a Hail Mary at the beginning, so I'm going to pray one now. Apologies. And I hope you get something out of this course. And if you want to, you can email me if you have any questions or comments or suggestions. That would be really helpful. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Bye.